So we don't know what the 53-man roster is going to be, but we have a decent idea of who the starters are. Mostly. We're still not exactly sure at right tackle. We're not exactly sure what they're going to do at safety. Essentially, the whole O-line minus Colton Miller is semi up in the air. But we know who our starting wide receivers are. We know who's going to start at running back, obviously quarterback, defensive line, more or less set, linebacking core, more or less set. And there'll be some additions, and every single year, every single season, there's a surprise cut. But we know enough, I think, to start kind of grading the roster, and that's what ESPN did. ESPN ranked the roster, not the team, not win-loss, not the coach, not predicting how they're going to end, just the roster, right? Just the chess pieces on the board. Where do you think the Raiders landed?
Well, I can see it because I have the rundown in front of me.
So you could have cheated, but you're a strong man.
I am.
21st.
Yeah.
Below average. Does that sound about right to you?
Yeah. Well, yeah, because it's the entire roster. I think that we're pretty top heavy even at the positions that we're steady and we're set at. There's still a very top heavy. There's not a lot of depth. I think the depth is what's going to be the issue here. Start at quarterback. We're set at quarterback. We're good, but the depth isn't all that great. Wide receiver, we got a couple of good receivers, and then what? Tight end, got a couple of good tight ends. Offensive line,
tight end, we got a lot of depth.
Yeah,
I like that, but that's
even
running back, a lot of depth.
Defensively, probably the most depth we have are probably going to be linebacker. We got a lot of good linebackers. People are sleeping on our linebackers. You got Kaiser, you got Brown, Perryman, Diablo, and he's probably two are going to play at a time. Defensive line is kind of an up in the air type of thing. We're top heavy. We got great defensive ends, but the depth, we have good. We have players behind them, but Cleveland Farrell, Kuntz, you got Fackrell. This Van Valkenburg kid from Iowa, man, I think he's a sleeper. He's good. Again, in the secondary, who are our studs? I mean, we got some names who hopefully they improve into the next year, and Hobbs and Merrick, and we got Averett, and we got Mullen coming back, and we got some guys. We got Rock Yassin coming in, who's good in man-to-man. So, again, we got some pieces, but it's I think that they're rated. If you're being objective, okay, I know a lot of times we're not really that good at being objective, but if we're being objective, there are a lot of question marks and a lot of prove it to me on the field guys that can really help push up this roster into the mid to high teens if those guys come to play and perform. But for right now, with all the question marks, I can see 2021 being about right.
So they pointed the writer at ESPN pointed to the explosive offense. Hopefully explosive passing game, right? Devontae Adams, Hunter Renfrow, Darren Waller, Derek Carr. Pointed that as the biggest strength. I think it's kind of a no-brainer. Biggest weakness, he said, the counter-argument to the explosive passing game is that the Raiders didn't do much to improve Carr's pass protection this offseason. The right side of Las Vegas' offensive line allowed more pressures than any other right guard, right tackle duo in the NFL in 2021, 124 pressures. And there's a chance that the Raiders run things back with Alex Leatherwood and Brandon Parker in those spots. And he also mentioned the big X factor being the DBs, which I think is pretty accurate. So I'm with this ranking. Pure personnel-wise, 21st makes some sense to me. And that shouldn't be a knock. That should be a source of pride. The fact that the Raiders are better than the sum of their parts. Opposite of the Chargers, right? The Chargers are just superstars and talent everywhere.
They shit the bed.
Can't crack the postseason to save their lives, right? The Raiders, last season, during that 4-game win streak to go to the playoffs, were the less talented team in probably all 4 of those games.
Oh, yeah.
But because of the locker room that we're always talking about, the way they come together, the leadership on the team, clutch gene, coaching, Carr's leadership, whatever you want to put it on, whatever you think is the reason, they were able to overcome some of their personnel deficiencies and go to the playoffs and be a 10-win team. So I'm down to look at our roster and say, okay, top to bottom, below average. especially with our O-line being so unproven, our DBs being so unproven. In our our offensive passing game, that's only 1/5 of the roster, right? That's not the entire team. So I'm not looking at this as ranked 21 and below average as negative. I'm looking at it as, yeah, that's probably pretty accurate. And basically, this team last season went 10-7, went to the playoffs.
Yeah, for sure. Look, the thing is, we have the potential to have some head turning players on our team.
Yeah.
The thing is some of those guys are in positions where they're just not known right now. Like Malcolm Kuntz. No one knows who the hell that is. Fackrell, he was like a pass rush specialist for the Chargers. He can do some things. If guys like Diablo and Merrick and Hobbs take that next step, and they're given more responsibility and they end up shining, they could be 3 really strong players. You got a Pro Bowler and Perryman there. So it's like the issue now is the depth that we have isn't known. They're not known commodities yet.
Yeah.
So not to say that at the end of the year they're going to have the 21st best roster, but for right now, because of the unknown, it seems about right.
A lot of youth, a lot of unproven guys. And in all fairness, the O-line was proven to be bad last season. So I don't think it's unfair to say, like, yeah, this O-line was crap last season. Like, why should we think it's going to be better? Other than they're all one season better, right? Because they're all young. So I think, anyway. But the good thing is we're not 21st across the board. We're, 2 and 3 in pass catchers and then 30th in O-line, right? We're, top 5 in running backs, bottom 5 on paper in DBs. And so when you know what your weaknesses are, you can scheme around it, right? The Cincinnati Bengals went to the Super Bowl last season with a trash O-line.
Worse than ours.
Worse than ours. You can scheme around holes that are obvious. I think that's what Nick Ziegler did this season, is like, you guys didn't touch your O-line. They're like, no, we're just going to make our pass catchers the best in football and scheme around it. We're going to lean on our strengths. We're going to have our weaknesses lean on our strengths. And I think that's the game plan, and a smart coach can scheme around your obvious. And again, we're not excusing the O-line for being bad. They need to get better. We need to, sign more players, coach the guys we got up, et cetera. But with the studs that we have in, strategic places, we can scheme around some of these holes.
I mean, we used the first pick that we had in the draft on the offensive line. We used another pick that we had on the offensive line. We signed a couple of guys off free agency. We signed a bunch of undrafted free agents from the offensive line. We're building a roster of guys that aren't necessarily going to help us this year, but it's going to build us a foundation moving forward. Because some of these guys can end up being starters, a couple of years down the line, and that costs us a lot of money. So when those opportunities, let's say next year, an opportunity rises up where, an offensive tackle falls into our lap, and he's going to be an upgrade to anything that we've had on the roster, of course you're going to take that. And that's how, you get that depth and you develop that depth, but, you're given draft picks for a reason, to get good players and make your team better. And if you find a guy in the offensive line, it takes a mix of both. You can't always draft a position to make it strong, or always free agent a position. You have to do both. You have to draft and develop and sign guys to make a position group strong.
Football is the ultimate team sport. And that's the beauty of football, is maybe you don't have the most skilled people at every position. You could still win it all.
Strategy, man.
And you can have the most skilled everything at every position.
And strategy.
Chargers.
Yeah, man. Like, look, the freaking Bengals made it to the Super Bowl. They were 1 score away from winning the Super Bowl with fucking 4 bomb-ass weapons on offense and a shit O-line and defense. That's what they got there, because they were able to put pressure on the opposing team, because they knew that the opposing team had to score more, and maybe it caused them to make a few mistakes. The Bengals team wasn't, a great defensive team, but they got turnovers and they were able to get sacks, And it's very similar to what I see happening to our team next year.
Congratulations for making it all the way to the end of our video. If you want Darren Waller to catch 20 touchdown passes next season and for Max Crosby to have 30 sacks, go ahead and subscribe and click the next video.